In 2018, a Supreme Court decision reshaped the way we understood gambling in the U.S.
In a 6-3 vote, the nation's highest court struck down a 1992 ruling that banned sports gambling in many states. The decision follows a challenge brought by the state of New Jersey.
The ruling could set the stage for states to expand legalized gambling as a source of government revenue. Until now, Nevada has been the only state where legalized sports betting is allowed.
Writing for the court, Justice Samuel Alito said Congress can regulate sports gambling directly, but if it elects not to do so, each state is free to act on its own.
Today, 39 states and Washington, D.C. have at least some form of legalized sports betting. Sports betting became legal in Connecticut in 2021. But the debate over how to regulate gambling is far from over. Back in January, NCAA President Charlie Baker reiterated a request for states to protect college athletes from the pressures of gambling by placing restrictions on proposition bets, or what's also known as prop bets. Prop bets allow people to bet on things other than the outcome of a game, like how many points a certain player will score. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about how gambling has changed over the last 8 years. Later in the show, we'll discuss why recovery from a gambling addiction is so difficult. But first, we'll talk about the way the business of gambling has evolved since 2018. Danny Funt is a reporter covering the sports betting boom for publications like The Washington Post and The New Yorker. He's author of Everybody Loses: The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. A note for our listeners, this episode contains mentions of addiction, mental health, and suicide. Danny, it's great to have you on Disrupted.
Glad to be with you.
Before we talk about gambling, and in particular sports gambling, I want to talk about you as a person who not just covers this beat, but is a sports fan. You root for Georgetown in college sports, and we were sort of talking about the long suffering of being a loyal collegiate fan. In the pros, you root for the Lakers and the 49ers, kind of a broad spread there. What does covering sports gambling mean for you as someone who is also a fan and has a love for sports in general? What's that connection for you?
It's why I care about it in the first place. I mean, so many most memorable and important moments in my life had something to do with sports. Even my wedding, my wife, in one of the most generous acts I could ever think of, shouted out my favorite player, LeBron James, in her wedding vows. So it's why I care about this, and it's why I wanted to examine this assertion that the advocates for gambling make, which is that gambling enhances fandom, that it's almost like fandom on steroids, and it gets you to care about so many things you might not otherwise care about, or you'll just be extra dialed in when you're watching a game. And unfortunately, from a little of my own experience, but more importantly, speaking with so many different people, from bettors of all sorts to people who work in the gambling industry, to athletes and other people inside the sports world, I'm deeply skeptical of that. I think more often than not, it kind of robs us of the things that we love about sports to begin with, and it replaces that with something a lot more corrosive and potentially even dangerous.
To the casual listener, they may say, well, people have always gambled on different things or always gambled on sports. What is it that drives this particular rise in sports gambling that led you to write this book?
The situation these days is just night and day from what it was pre-2018 when the Supreme Court struck down this federal ban on bookmaking. And the professional leagues who had come around by then to be such aggressive advocates for gambling, and other people who've been pushing for legalization across the country, they argue that, as you said, people have been gambling. All that would happen would be we would convert people from the black market to licensed operators so that it could be taxed and so that consumer protections could be installed. It's similar to the argument for legalizing cannabis, and maybe that rationale paved the way for this. But it's so obvious that vastly more people are gambling than ever before. It's easier than ever. You can download it on the App Store. You can deposit money with a tap of your phone via PayPal, Venmo, your credit card, even in some states. Just the ease of it and the number of things you can bet on now when you are betting online, and about 95% of this business is conducted online. That again is just a whole new universe of betting opportunities, to the point that thousands of prop bets exist within every game. These bets on things like how many touchdowns a quarterback will throw for, how many rebounds a player will get in a game. All of these games within the game are distinctly available online, and the fact that you can bet in real time. And so, yes, people might have had a neighborhood bookie if they were determined to bet, or even find an offshore sports book. That's actually been an issue in Connecticut and elsewhere in the country, that the offshore gambling industry has not been snuffed out by legalization, despite what we were promised. I just see such a new way of engaging with gambling, and also gambling becoming the default way of engaging with sports for a lot of people. That's something unique and distinct of this era.
For me in my own life, sport has always been this way of building community, of people coming together who perhaps wouldn't normally come together. They can come together on a soccer field or on a lacrosse field. They can go to a basketball game and have this communal experience. And whether that's at the high school level, the professional level, or increasingly even younger of some of these youth leagues. The other thing that I've seen, Danny, is that it's become so much more contentious and divisive because more people are paying attention, but the stakes are also much higher for people, that they then become locked in because, this means something for them and their outcome. Are we overstating that potential for the corrosive element for it? Or is in this book that you're able to show, no, actually, these are real examples of how this is having a detrimental effect? Talk me through that piece of it.
Two things come to mind. One, when you brought up the fact that sports builds community, I completely agree. And yet, from talking specifically with someone who used to work as a high-level marketing official at FanDuel, the number one online sports book in the country, she told me that, yeah, some people have group chats where they talk about their bets, or they go to the bar and that's something that they're all talking about. But from her research, a lot of people who are betting online are alone, and it's sort of a remedy for loneliness. You're at home, you're bored. This is a way to spice up a night and get you to take interest in a game you might not otherwise care about. I've definitely been in that position where, my wife's out of town, or I'm stuck at home and it's a weekday and I'm trying to spice things up. And yeah, gambling is extremely tempting and effective at making you suddenly obsessed with what you're watching. But there's also maybe a negative side to that. And when you think about the fact that a lot of this took off during the pandemic, when so many people were isolated at home, it's clear to see why it appeals to people in that position. The other thing you brought up about corrosiveness, that maybe worries me as much as anything. I don't want to get judgy about, what's the right way to be a fan, or is there a proper way to engage with sports? But I do think it's clear that the spread of gambling has brought out a level of rage and aggression and hostility toward athletes that's unprecedented. I opened the book with a story of a college basketball player, a men's player at Purdue, who made an end of game basket in the first round of the tournament a few years ago. And to him, it was like a dream come true. He's a bench player who hardly ever played. His team was overjoyed that he made this irrelevant three-pointer at the end of the game. And yet he gets back in the locker room, and as athletes tend to do nowadays, he starts scrolling through his DMs on social media, and it's one message after another of just the nastiest hate mail saying, enjoy being a car salesman next year, or kill yourself, or even stuff that's too profane to say on air. And all of that was because, unbeknownst to him and his teammates, that three-pointer had caused Purdue to cover the point spread. And everyone who had bet on Purdue to not cover the spread was furious at him, even though what's he supposed to do? Not make the shot? So I hear that that's a game by game reality for players at all levels and of all stature, from superstars to bench players. They're dealing with nonstop harassment from gamblers, even much worse. I've heard of athletes being stalked at their team hotel or at home. JB Bickerstaff, the head coach of the Detroit Pistons, said people have texted him that they know the identities of his kids and where he lives. That sort of menacing behavior is terrifying. And I even heard from the former chief security officer of the NFL that, as he put it, it's only a matter of time before one of these enraged gamblers tries to kill an athlete because they cost them money and they're at a point of just being determined to get revenge. And that, again, I can't stress this enough. This is a byproduct of the spread and mainstreaming of online gambling. I'll just wrap this up by saying I spoke with someone at the NCAA who's in charge of gambling policy. They said that kind of harassment was like a flickering flame pre-2018. And now, as he put it, it's a wildfire burning out of control.
Coming up, more with Danny Funt, author of Everybody Loses, The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. He'll talk about how gambling companies think about the work they do.
I spoke with a former executive at another company who said, when you think about it, my job was basically to bleed customers dry.
And later, we'll talk about recovery from a gambling addiction.
So what you need to do is get your brain to heal, and that's possible.
This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about how gambling has changed since sports betting became legal in 2018. Danny Funt is a journalist and author of Everybody Loses, The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. I asked Danny why he chose the title Everybody Loses.
The fact that Americans now wager more than $150 billion legally every year, that adds up to a staggering amount of lost money. But it's also sports media losing its independence, people losing confidence in the integrity of games as there's one match fixing or corruption scandal after another as a result of gambling. And also the health consequences of this are really alarming, whether with kids, and we're seeing rates of problem gambling among kids from college all the way down to elementary school, reaching unprecedented levels, and who knows how that's going to develop. And also people who are adults and they're finding, this can be a brutal addiction. It's the only addiction that's recognized that's not substance-based. People who've dealt with gambling addictions say it's unbelievably difficult to overcome, in part because it's an invisible addiction, so that people around you can be totally oblivious to what you're going through. And also because you get in this mindset where you think, my affliction is my remedy. As in, if I could just win one more bet, I'll be okay. I'll get out of this hole I've put myself in. And you asked about people who win money. It's extremely difficult long-term to win money betting on sports. But even if you are lucky enough to be in that 1%, two people come to mind who I think are cautionary tales. One was a winning bettor in New Jersey, and he had this clever angle to bet on basketball, but he could bet on all leagues all over the world, and this angle was applicable, and he was winning money. But he told me how he would be faced with a decision of, should I put my kids to bed or should I go watch a game and hopefully make some money? And he always went, why not make the money? I can put my kids to bed another night. Or he'd be pushing his stroller and he'd catch himself glancing at his phone constantly to see the scores of games he'd bet on. And he told me, I just lost so much time that I'll never get back because I grew addicted to gambling, even though I was winning. He also went bald from all the stress of gambling. So you could even say he lost his hair because of that. And then the other person who came to mind, I'll just say briefly, was a man in Connecticut who's a 5th grade teacher. And he told me he, like so many people, saw all these ads and was a sports fan and thought, okay, I can leverage my knowledge of sports to make money. and he actually won $10,000. But for so many people, that big win ends up being a curse because you spend every day or every minute of every day potentially chasing not just that money, but that thrill and that feeling of hitting that jackpot. And it got to the point where he lost $100,000 in about a year. Much of it was money that his in laws had given him and his wife to pay for a house. And eventually his wife caught him, and he's now thankfully in recovery for a gambling problem. But it was so damaging. And so I just think about all these different dimensions of losing, and it's really hard to comprehend. And then you ask, well, what exactly are we winning? And that can be a lot harder to pinpoint.
I remember a few years ago, a colleague asked me to come observe their class. And I sat in the back of the lecture hall because I wanted to be there, but didn't want people to know I was there. Danny, as I was sitting in the back of the room, I noticed there were lines of students who were on their phones. And initially I thought, like, what are they watching something? Are they texting? They were all gambling. And it was the first time for me that I realized the nature of this epidemic, because it is an epidemic, that I realized that there were particular demographics that seemed to be particularly into this, but I didn't want to overstate it based on this one observation. So I had a conversation with another colleague, like, are you seeing this in your class? Am I just not paying attention? They said, no. It is much more difficult to get students or young people not to place these bets than it is to have them put their phone away so they're not texting a friend or looking for a new sneaker drop. And I started thinking about the demographics of who is most affected by this problem and then what can be lost in that. You mentioned a little while ago in our conversation about the debate surrounding the legalization of cannabis and the idea that if we can regulate it, then we can better protect consumers. That has not been the case when it comes to gambling. What are you seeing across the states in terms of their willingness to step in and say, people may do this whether we're involved or not, but we need to be sensitive to or have some protections in place? What are you seeing at the state level?
There was, I think, a conspicuously brief amount of time given to just stopping and thinking, not just should we legalize, but how should we legalize? There was such an odd sense of urgency in Connecticut, all the tri-state, across the country of, we can suddenly legalize this. Let's go. Let's start cashing in. And as a result, so many regulations were half-baked and poorly thought through. So many of the regulators installed don't understand the nuance of online sports betting. It's a lot different than regulating a lottery or casinos. And yet, or even sometimes they just got police officers and put them in charge of gambling. And it's a unique beast to have to police. And then beyond that, a lot of states just trusted these gambling operators to self-police. And the operators have been very adamant that, they can take on that responsibility. No, don't install tighter guardrails. We've got this. And I think one of the things from my reporting that's most striking is speaking with a lot of people who work at these gambling companies, including at very high levels, and hearing from them that they're alarmed by the way things are unfolding and that they don't trust their companies to self-police. They think states and maybe even Congress need to step in and demand more strict consumer protections because the incentives are just misaligned. There was someone who's high ranking in responsible gaming at one of these top operators, and she said, anything beyond the lowest common denominator of consumer protections is seen inside these companies as a competitive disadvantage. Meaning, as long as we're at the baseline, that's fine. But if we go above and beyond to look out for the well-being of our customers, we're going to lose money to our competitors. I spoke with a former executive at another company who said, when you think about it, my job was basically to bleed customers dry. And he said, if you're lucky enough to be an executive at one of these companies, you can make good money, but you don't feel good about it. That's for sure. That's his quote. And so I just think eventually states probably will wake up to the fact that this is out of control, that kids are being imperiled. I definitely don't think your experience is unique. I hear that all the time now, that kids are suddenly obsessed with gambling, that it's way too easy for them to bet. And also that because of the way these companies are allowed to advertise, it's contributed to the normalization of gambling. This used to be something that even people who did it, they did it discreetly. It wasn't something they talked about all the time. You wouldn't go to a kid's birthday party and be talking with the other parents about the bets you were placing. I'm guessing most likely. Now that's ubiquitous. And a big piece of it is this nonstop advertising, the fact that in much of the country, you've got A-list movie stars and heroes in sports pitching these brands and gambling in general as just the thing to do nowadays. And I think the fact that kids and so many people think this is just the way that you engage with sports nowadays is the clear byproduct of that.
I think about where we are in the US right now, politically, the sort of pressures that some companies are feeling to maximize profit with little concern. And I come back to this question as I think about your work, Danny, and I think about gambling. Where does the responsibility lie so that we're not stigmatizing people who may need help or need support? We are recognizing the profit-driven nature of the industry and still, as you argue in this book, understand that this is not sustainable. Where does the responsibility lie, or where do the possibilities lie to see some kind of change?
I can't help but mention, I got a kick out of the fact that, of course, Virginia has that famous slogan, Virginia is for lovers. And then all these different brands and interests say Virginia is for XYZ. But the legislature passed a law that you can't use the expression Virginia is for gamblers. They just didn't like the sound of that, even though they raced to legalize sports betting in a way that was so favorable to the industry. I remember speaking with the main lobbyist who pushed for that bill, and she was gushing about how effective her lobbying had been in getting everything that her clients wanted. And I said, surely there was something you didn't get in that bill that you were pushing for. And she thought about it for a minute and said, no, not really. We basically got everything we asked for. And I think that's the bottom line here. I'm not judging people who bet on sports. I bet a little bit myself. I understand the appeal of it. I understand that adults should be able to spend their money how they choose. But I think a lot of us can agree that you shouldn't be taken advantage of by corporations, and you should get a level playing field or a fair playing field if you're going to do something that's legal and regulated. And so much of how this industry has taken shape and become such a Goliath in American life is rooted in the fact that these companies are preying on people and they're allowed to exploit customers and target the most vulnerable customers. And that's something a lot of people take issue with. Again, even people who work in the industry are bothered by that fact and they feel like something needs to be done. So I think as people come to terms with that, there will be change. There's a lot that can be done short of reverting to prohibition. Some of it, I think, is forcing the industry to be more honest about the dangers involved and the fact, whether it's the fact that this can be addictive, which is something the industry refuses to concede, or the fact that gambling isn't a way to make money. And so much of their advertising suggests otherwise. And I think that has a real effect on deluding people, especially kids, into thinking this is a side hustle or an investing strategy as opposed to gambling, which we know to tread carefully whenever we go into a casino or play the lottery. And yet sports betting has a different connotation. And I think also eventually people are going to recognize that we need tighter guardrails. That's something that's been demanded elsewhere in the world where they've had online sports betting for longer. Just the problem is, what's it going to take for lawmakers to wake up to that? I've asked a lot of people to try to look to the future and see what that might be. And it's pretty grim, whether it's surging addiction rates or suicides. And the suicidal ideation rate among gambling addicts is terrifyingly high, whether it's an athlete being the subject of an attack from one of these enraged gamblers, as we were discussing, whether it's a major match fixing scandal, which I would probably vote for just because that doesn't involve someone getting hurt, but it would really damage our trust in sports and shatter something that a lot of us care about. So that seems like what it'll take because states are making good money off this.
Danny Funt is a reporter who covers the sports betting boom. He's author of Everybody Loses: The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. Thank you, Danny.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, we'll talk more about how the internet is affecting those who experience gambling harm.
Bars close. Cannabis shops close. Casinos, online gambling is 24/7 access to your wallet.
This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about the current state of gambling in the U.S. Now that we've talked a bit about sports betting companies, we turn now to talk about how gambling is affecting people on an individual level. Brian Hatch is Community Engagement Manager for the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. He's also the host of All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast. You'll notice that my audio quality sounds a little off in the beginning of this interview, but no worries. We had a technical issue, but it was fixed for the second half. Our conversation was recorded on Friday, April 3rd. Keep that in mind when we reference dates. Brian, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
You host a podcast and you're also working with the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. Talk to our listeners about why this work is so important and so meaningful for you.
At its core, people need help. And with problem gambling and gambling addiction, gambling disorder, sometimes people don't realize that that's an addiction in itself. They just think they're bad with money. But mostly it's people always feel like they're the only ones who messed up and gambled away their money. And so just letting people know that they're not alone, that this is something that does happen to many, 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 many people, millions of people across our country, hundreds of thousands across our state, that it's okay to reach out for help. And at the Connecticut Council, we operate the helpline. You can reach out to the helpline there and you'll get somebody to direct you towards resources. And that involves treatment with a gambling specific clinician through our Better Choice Gambling Treatment Program, or maybe getting a idea of where a Gamblers Anonymous meeting is by you, or online gambling support meeting, or somebody on social media who talks about this that we can send you to follow. So all sorts of places to go and not feel so alone.
We will add resources and links to our website for people who need or want more information. But I also listened, Brian, you used a number of terms in talking about this: disordered gambling, gambling addiction, really helping people to better understand there's a science behind addiction that, as you said, is not just bad choices or just behaviors. There is an addiction to this that I think can then shape our approach to understanding and getting help for those who need it. Talk to me about that change to helping people better see, yes, this is an addiction, and addictions can invite different forms of a treatment. What's that move to better understand gambling addiction as an addiction?
Addiction shows up in brain scans. You can see it on the brain. And when you're addicted, the brain lights up in different ways. There was a study years ago that whether you were addicted to a substance or you had a process addiction like gambling, your brain's reward center was lighting up the exact same. So it didn't matter if a substance was involved or a chemical was involved. So what you need to do is get your brain to heal. And that's possible somewhere in the range of 7 to 14 weeks after you stop the addictive behavior. The brain starts to heal itself and you do get better. People are very worried in that very moment because they can't pay bills and they didn't tell their spouse that they're gambling and some of the college fund for the kid is gone and they're panicked. And so they reach out for help. And the idea in that moment is to just talk to them and let them know, like, listen, there's plenty of people that we all know that have been in your exact shoes. And at this very moment today, right, it's not going to get better today. But if you stop the gambling, stop the bleeding, the money comes back, and that helps to alleviate the worry on at least financial harms. And then you got to work on your brain and heal your brain. So that way you don't want to gamble in the future. And that was somewhere I was, in all my gambling, I was never lucky, but I was lucky enough in recovery to get to a point where I don't even want to gamble anymore. It's just not something that I want to have as a part of my life.
You are on a recovery journey. And I can hear in the way that you talk about this topic, Brian, that there is an empathy and a form of understanding that invites people in without them feeling like I have to just be in shame and I have to just figure this thing out on my own. And I think the challenge for people who want to be in recovery and who want to heal is that step of saying, yes, I deserve to be able to do that. And I think it's why it makes you so powerful in this space and powerful in terms of understanding what people are going through. There's one thing that you mentioned when you were just talking about that as well, is the ways that people often navigate this in hiding or in seclusion, because what gambling looks like now seems quite different from when you started your recovery journey. And that's because people can now gamble in private and in secret in different ways because of technology and their phones. How has that shift affected not just the journey you're on, but the ways that you empower other people to embrace a journey?
Once you start talking about online gambling, that's accessible 24/7 and tied to your bank account. And that's scary. That's scary. I needed gas money and time to drive to a casino that was hours away. And back when I grew up in Michigan, there was some friction there. And that's what you need when you're trying to stop, is a little friction. You need to be able to get up and walk over to the ATM and in that walk to the ATM, think like, oh boy, is this a good idea? That friction has been eliminated with online gambling. It's just another press of a button. Your brain doesn't have any time to make a better decision or make a better choice. Luckily, because there is so much gambling these days, more people are talking about gambling addiction. And more people, I'm not the only one who does a podcast anymore. There was a point in my life where I was, but now there's 20 podcasts about gambling addiction. There's people on every form of social media talking about it. So you can walk out in the world and find somebody very easily through a small Google search to listen to. And I'm not saying listen to me. Listen to whoever. Find somebody who you relate to and see what they say about it. And the idea behind listening to someone's recovery story isn't that they have all the answers. It's, oh, they tried this. Oh, they're a little like me. Oh, I found some commonality with them. Maybe I'll try what they tried. Maybe I'll try a GA meeting. Maybe it doesn't work. So I'll try an online gambling support meeting. Maybe that doesn't work. So I'll try treatment. And then, talking to a gambling specific clinician is very helpful because they understand what's going on with your brain, and they've talked to hundreds of other people just like yourself. And so they know what they're talking about. You just have to have a little buy-in to what they're saying. And to your point earlier, I was the kid who, I would use terms like junkie and stuff when I was a teenager, just living my life, country boy out in Michigan. And then I got a gambling addiction. And one day it occurred to me, I'm no different than anybody with an addiction. This is just a different way of getting the addiction. And that really changed my worldview on people who have substance use issues and people who use alcohol to harm. And I run a program in the Department of Corrections. So I go into prisons and I run gambling recovery groups. And I talk to those guys. And again, it just opens your mind up to more understanding. If they weren't wearing the color that they were wearing in that group, you would have no idea I'm sitting in a prison with a group of guys who are incarcerated. You'd think I was just at any recovery meeting anywhere, right? Because these guys are open and vulnerable. And so just being in this world of addiction has really changed my worldview on people. People struggle, people need help. And, if you're in a position to help them, you should do it.
I am having this conversation with you. I'm in New Haven right now. And one of the stories that broke earlier this year was about the police chief of the city of New Haven who resigned, but was later arrested and charged with embezzling funds while betting on online gambling platforms. Brian, people were shocked. How could someone in such an important position, someone in charge of overseeing law enforcement in so many different ways, have so much respect within the communities, all different segments of the community, be involved in this behavior and risk so much? And it was a quotation from the former chief that I think really made many of us stop and think differently, where he said, I was able to kick this alcohol addiction, but I couldn't shake this one. And it made it so clear, Brian, for those who do not have proximity to addiction or have never either themselves navigated a disorder or didn't know someone who had, it made it clear that it doesn't matter your title, doesn't matter your position, doesn't matter your standing. Someone who is navigating this is a person in that. When you hear stories like that, does it help the cause in terms of getting greater public awareness and understanding? Or does it give you pause to say, wait a minute, we don't want everyone to think there is a one size fit all to what people are navigating? How do you respond to those kind of high profile stories?
Well, first and foremost, I hope he and his family are okay. God bless him for being able to talk about it a little bit. But I heard that story and I had a different reaction than some people around me. I heard that story and I was like, well, this is a guy with an addiction. I've known several people with an addiction who embezzled money. And it's I get people from the outside looking, oh, well, he committed a crime and he's a cop and he should pay the consequences. And he absolutely should pay the consequences for what he did. But I would say that in the state of Nevada, they have gambling diversion courts where if you commit a crime in service of your addiction and it's a nonviolent crime, you can go to this diversion court and avoid serving time. And so in Nevada, they understand gambling as an addiction. In Connecticut, we have substance use diversion courts, but we don't have gambling diversion courts. As far as embezzlement, when you're in a position where you have access to money and you have a gambling addiction, in your head, it's just a quick, all right, let me take $100. I'll put it back tomorrow when I win. And then you lose. And you're like, all right, let me take $200. And you can see how this gets bad because eventually you dig a deep enough hole where it's like, I don't know what else to do to get out of this except to keep gambling. Gambling's the one addiction where if you do it enough, you might get out of the harm that it caused you, at least the financial harm, not the mental. But in his case, I feel terrible for him in a high profile spot. I would offer that first responders are at a higher risk level to develop a gambling addiction, to develop any addiction due to the nature of their work, right? When I gambled to numb out, and that's I don't know why he was doing it, but he did it in that way. And you get to a spot where you just think it's just a little bit of money, I'll put it back. And then it gets out of hand. And mine got out of hand. I started in college. I got kicked out of college. That should have been a pretty good warning sign that I shouldn't be doing it. 14 years later, I had to file bankruptcy, right? Like that's not what I wanted to do in life. And I had that same thought of like, I knew better for 14 years. How did I let it get to bankruptcy? But it did. And that woke me up and that made me stop. And I haven't gambled in the last 12 years. But I feel bad for him and his family. I hope they're okay.
You mentioned first responders, which we know are exposed to trauma in so many ways and are exposed to really complex, talk about, the human condition, exposed to so many complex situations on a daily basis that navigating that can result in all kinds of other behaviors around that coping, around that getting through. Are there other populations or groups that you think are at particular risk or that we are seeing sort of changes or increases in gambling harm? Are there other groups we should be thinking about when we think about the impact of this?
Yes. Well, veterans, one, they're kind of in that first responder reasons why. College kids, 1 in 10 college kids could qualify for a gambling disorder. 1 in 10 college kids. At least half of college kids have placed a bet in the last year, maybe 70%, I think it was the number. And I go to college campuses and every single one of them has a friend. They always have a friend. It's never them. Once in a while, it's them, which I think is really nice of them to come up and share with us when we're at a table. I say that too, because yesterday there was a bill that was voted on and got out of committee to help prevent that on college campuses, which I think is great. But college kids, 1 in 10, that's 10%. That's, 5 times higher than the national average. So I think we really need to focus on college kids, and college kids are advertised to more than I'm ever advertised to. Gambling on the phone is much more addictive than gambling at a casino. And so it is definitely something to pay attention to. The reason I'm in DOC is because the prevalence rate within prisons, the risk rate, is 20 times higher than that outside the prison. So that's why we're there. People who already struggle with substance use or mental health problems are at 2.5, 4 times as high a risk rate, right? If you already struggle with one addiction, the likelihood that you might try another. And by the way, without fail, every single Gamblers Anonymous room I've ever sat in, when somebody has struggled with a previous addiction, they always say gambling was the hardest one to get over, just like the officer said. So it's tough because it affects your wallet. Substances and alcohol, while yes, they do cost money, and I'm sure some drugs are high priced, gambling will always cost more because it's what you need to keep going. And eventually you hit a point with drugs or alcohol where your body shuts down. It either rejects it or it shuts down and you pass out or you overdose, sadly. And with gambling, you can keep going as long as there's money, and people who gamble will find a way. We all find a way. And now, between PayPal and credit cards and cash apps and crazy shady internet loans and all the different ways you can get money, there are more and more ways to dig a hole very deep in debt. And so I hope people remember that gambling is very addictive. Just be careful. I would never tell anyone not to gamble. Like, go gamble, have a good time. I hope you win. I hope you get that money. But it is a risk that is not worth taking in the long run.
As I listen to you, Brian, talk about all of the new ways that can feed this challenge, whether it is payday loans or being able to get money and credit in other ways, it brings me back to the central question of where does the responsibility lie to really change some of what we are seeing? You mentioned this piece of legislation that could focus on how young people are targeting. I think about all the ways that in the 80s and 90s, we started changing regulation around tobacco and advertising it to young people. Where does the responsibility lie? Is it government? Is it community? Is it individual? What do we do?
First, let me just say that my gambling addiction, I don't blame anybody but myself. I knew I shouldn't have been doing it, and I did it for 14 years, and I don't blame the casino I went to. But times have changed, and I absolutely blame the industry these days for people getting addicted on the phones, because the advertising is much more, the enticements are much more. They're begging people to do it essentially through these ads. And so I do put the blame at the foot of the industry as much as at the foot of the gambler. But it is the government whose responsibility it is to keep us safe. And I don't think the government has done a very good job. I don't think they did their due diligence when this started in 2021 for online gambling. Having 24/7 access to something that can bankrupt you overnight is not the greatest tool in the shed to have. Gambling, the national rate that is given, which is low, I would argue, is 1% to 2%. Heroin use is 0.4%, less than 1% of people. But we wouldn't legalize heroin. So I don't know why gambling is looked at differently, except that I do. It's because it's normalized in our society since we were kids. We all gambled as kids. We all did football squares. We all played cards with our friends. And so gambling is normalized and looked at differently in society. Like, this is just a bit of entertainment. But we are in a different era. We have prediction markets that are sold as trades, not gambling, but they're absolutely 100% gambling apps. We're gambling on wars and people dying. It's disgusting. And then you have sports betting, which, at least with sports, I understand, it's sports. There's competition. You can see a result and you can maybe benefit a little from that as a result. And you're betting, $20 on the over under or something, whatever. It's fine. But it's when that makes you think like, oh, I can keep betting and I'm really good at this. It's when you fill out your March Madness bracket and March Madness is over and you're like, well, now what? I really enjoyed that. I want to go more. And I can give the government grace in saying that I don't think they really fully realized what this was when they legalized it. But I would also say that if a child said that to them, they would say, well, you should have done your homework. And so I think they should have done their homework. And I hope they make some changes to make gambling a little less accessible. Because the thing about stopping gambling is you have to have a break. And currently, it's going every day, all day, and there's no breaks to be had until you're out of money. And so I just hope they get the message to prevent a little harm, because that's what we in my field try to do, is to prevent a little harm and offer a little help. And it'd be nice to have some assistance with that.
As we come to our time and a close here, Brian, this is a massive problem. It seems like it is growing every day. And yet it is also a challenge that in the work that you do, in the spaces that you are in, there is hope and there is possibility. And I see that in your work, just in saying to people, look, this is what I went through. It doesn't mean that's what you have to do, but let's at least create a space for the conversation. What gives you hope as you do this work, that by raising awareness, by meeting people where they are, we can see some outcome? What gives you hope in your work?
The hope is given through one-on-one interaction, right? When I'm talking to somebody new and they're willing. The hope is, when my colleagues and I take a helpline phone call and it's somebody who's a little apprehensive, and then by the end of the call, they're like, all right, I'll go to treatment. It's just getting them there. You never know what happens after that. But I go to college campuses and kids walk up and go, I don't gamble. No, that's silly. And I'm like, oh, yeah. You're not in the majority, but I still it's nice to hear those things. But to your point, I don't say this lightly, and other people, we've been saying this a while, and I'm pretty educated on the topic, and I don't think it's a stretch that this is the next opioid crisis. This is absolutely, we're there. And I don't think people see it that way because it's gambling. It's sold as a bit of entertainment. And at one point it was, but that was before it was readily available in all of our pockets. And for the record, bars close. Cannabis shops close. Casinos, online gambling is 24/7 access to your wallet. So just the only thing you can do is hold on to your money. So just be careful, because cryptocurrency, day trading, prediction market apps, back alley dice games, everybody's out to get your money. So just hold on to it and you don't have to worry. But if you need help, there's not just myself, there's plenty of people in the state of Connecticut. Connecticut has one of the best ecosystems to help people with the gambling harm. We have wonderful peers, people like myself who are harmed by gambling and now help other people, talk to other people. At its main core, recovery is talking. And you can talk to a group of people, talk to a friend, talk to a cousin, talk to a relative, talk to a clinician who understands the brain and what's going on. Just talk to somebody. Because that's why I started a podcast, so I could talk about my addiction. And that is what my main recovery tool has been for 12 years, talking about my addiction. Because when you talk about it, it keeps it present in your mind. It keeps the pain real. And if you do that, you're less likely to go back. There's no magic way, right? You just got to talk about it. And if you don't have anyone to talk about it with, then call the helpline at 888-789-7777 in Connecticut, and I'll talk to you.
Recovery is talking. And we are so grateful, Brian, that you talk about recovery, that you support others in that, and that in your talking, you are reminding all of us of the need to address this and to see what we can do in whatever space we are in. So we are grateful for the talking that you do, but the doing that is a part of your journey as well. Brian Hatch is Community Engagement Manager for the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. He's also host of All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
If you or someone you care about is adversely affected by gambling, you can reach out to the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling's helpline at 888-789-7777. That's 888-789-7777. The National Problem Gambling Helpline is also available at 1-800-MY-RESET. That's 1-800-697-3738. This episode was produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon-Aiken, Erica McIntosh, and Meg Fitzgerald. Special thanks to our interns Davina Corderu and Megan Rodriguez-Hawkins. You can listen to more than 250 episodes of Disrupted in our archive, and you can find us wherever you get your podcast. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Thanks for listening.